Hi, everybody, and welcome to another Salesforce Ben live event, LinkedIn live event. I am so excited to be here and to be joined by my lovely guests. My name is Julia Solis. I am the marketing manager at Salesforce Ben. I'm also a Salesforce newcomer, so architects were a big, curiosity for me, and I'm so excited that we're having this conversation. But let me introduce my guests. If you would like to say hi.
Hi, shall we just jump in and say a bit about ourselves?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So, hi everyone, I'm Lilith Zambison. I'm a principal architect at Capgemini and I'm also a Salesforce CTA. And then, yeah, I've been in the ecosystems, I think, since 2017 and currently working as an architect, which was an interesting journey for sure, which we'll cover today as well.
Hi everyone, my name is Christine Marshall. I'm the Salesforce evangelist here at Salesforce Ben, and I've been an admin since 2014, but I'm also an aspiring architect who is really towards the beginning of my journey. So I'm very excited to be joined by two actual architects today who are going to give me and you some great advice on how we can achieve this goal.
Great. Well, thank you. Oh, sorry, Ankit. Sorry.
It's all right. Hey, everyone. My name is Ankit, and I am a freelance Salesforce architect. I would call myself an accidental architect. So I started in the ecosystem in 2012 as a developer, and somehow I just went through the ranks and became an architect. And yeah, I'll cover more during the show, or I'll cover more during the session that we'll have, and you'll learn more about my journey, and hopefully that helps you on your journey.
Well, thank you. Sorry, I interrupted you. And welcome, everybody. Like you said, architects have a very different journeys, and this is a conversation worth having. Earlier in the year, Salesforce released a hiring guide in terms of architects, and which is why we're having this conversation. It's a very in-demand profession, so I'm happy to be having this, having everybody here and discussing what we're going to be discussing. This webinar is going to be recorded. It will be available in this on this LinkedIn page for eternity, and you can also find it on our YouTube channel. So here is a stat. As you can see, architects are not clearly understood. Oftentimes, people are asked for tasks that they cannot perform. As you can see, 40% of respondents that are architects have been asked to complete tasks that are, within outside of their reach. But I'm going to be handing off to Christine, Ankit, and Lilith. I will be back later for a Q&A session, so drop your comments below. If you have any questions for our lovely guests, we will be answering them later on. So I'll see you guys later.
Thank you so much, Julia. So for us, the first question to really tackle today is what and who is a Salesforce architect? Because one of the things that we feel is the role of an architect is quite heavily misunderstood. And there are so many different types of architects. What is an actual architect? So let's kick it off then, and let's go straight to Lilith. Do you agree that the role of a Salesforce architect is clearly understood amongst the community and, in fact, Salesforce professionals and the companies that are employing them?
So no, I agree indeed that I don't think that there's a clear understanding of what is an architect in the Salesforce ecosystem. And one of the things, or one of the misconceptions that I see a lot is that, architects have to be highly specialized in a particular domain, or they have to have a wealth of technical knowledge and be very, very technical. And that, I think that's a common misconception. It also leads to people asking a lot of questions and thinking that, as an architect, you're like a walking encyclopedia, and it doesn't get any better for CTAs. That, it raises the bar. The encyclopedia becomes even bigger, or the expectation there. So no, I think there's a lot of misconceptions on that front.
And what about you, Ankit? Oh, I think we've got you on mute.
Sorry, my bad. I would continue what Lilith said. So yeah, we also did like this architect AMA in Berlin, and it's just not a technical position. It's basically a position where you need to be you need to be a good communicator, and it works as, it's like who is an architect is basically taking, like requirements from stakeholders who might not be technical people and transforming them and forwarding them to the team who are technical people. So that's basically the job of an architect. And of course you work as a subject matter expert, but as Lilith said, you're not like a walking encyclopedia or a walking Google. I mean, sometimes as architects you also have to Google, but you kind of need to have that holistic like bird's eye view. So you need to know what are the different moving parts of the system. I think that's more, yeah, that's somebody who's an architect.
So I think something that's very interesting are the different types of architects. And we've got Lilith here today, who is a CTA, but there are many types of architects. Could you touch on that a little bit, Lilith?
Yeah, so definitely I think I'm going to fall back on one of the best articles that I've read about this on Salesforce Ben, coincidentally, by Gemma Blizzard, where she talks about a few different types of architects. So she calls out solution, data, technical, enterprise, and transformation. And these are already quite a bit, but to be fair, I think there's others like an integration architect that you can really also include into that list. So that's the thing. There's a lot of different flavors and different understandings of what an architect is. And between some of them, the lines can get very, very blurry. So for example, what is solution, what is technical, and where do these, end and where doesn't the other one start, is a very mixed boundary, let's say, that I see differing between different companies, but also different projects. So yeah, there's for me not that one clear definition and clear description, of what an architect is. And we can try and define it a bit more, which we will today. But yeah, don't try to think that you have to fit into a particular box. That would be my particular advice.
Yeah, I think sometimes when we talk about architects, people think of the top of that pyramid. They think of CTA and forget about all the different levels of architects on the way up. I think coming from an admin background, being an accidental admin, for me, there's a question around, well, what makes an actual architect? Where do the lines blur? At what point, as maybe an admin or a consultant, do I start to work as an architect? Do I need those certifications to say that I'm an architect? I feel that there may be admins doing architect type responsibilities, but perhaps don't realize that's what they're doing. And perhaps the role of an architect could be something that they should be working towards if they want to. So Ankit, what do you think makes an actual architect? Where are those boundaries between the roles?
So I think an actual architect needs to have more like a long-term vision. And I mean, anybody can be an architect. So, even if you're working on your org and let's say you get a task, and if you can already foresee, okay, what are the implications of how this new feature will affect, the other things, then you are, in my eyes, an architect. You don't need a paper to tell you that you are or you are not, so that's what makes an architect, and it's about taking the initiative. So I started as a developer, and then I moved into consulting, and then I started working as a freelancer, and then at one point I was just the one person working for a smaller client, so they just had 100 licenses, and I was taking all those decisions, and also taking decisions like, should we solve it with declarative, so using process builders at that time, or should we use code? So architect is someone who's taking that big long-term view. Where are the things going? What will be the implication, limits and everything. I mean, you don't have to remember every limit, how many API calls we have, but having just that, bigger picture in your mind when taking decisions, I think that's someone who's an architect.
And Lilith, how about you? How would you, when do you think someone is an actual architect? And how do you feel about people who are perhaps doing architect type of duties who aren't an architect yet?
So I completely agree with Ankit that, it's all about seeing the helicopter view. And I would even say that's a mindset that you have to generate, right? You have to be able to really connect the dots everything that's going on, you have to have some understanding. Again, you don't have to understand every little detail on how something is done, but you need to see the larger context there. And that will make sure that, as Ankit described, you have something that will last on the long term, that will work end to end, and that will be also user friendly, because that is something that sometimes is a bit forgotten. But I think as an architect, sometimes we are just pragmatic in saying, okay, maybe this could have a technical solution, but is it really worth it? Will it really be that user friendly? Will it be something that is adoptable for our end users? So everything comes into play and everything is connected. And that's where I see an architect is, again, balancing business and IT and making sure that whatever you have will hold for the long term. So that's where I would place a lot of the value and emphasis on an architect. And yes, you can start doing things within an architect responsibilities tool set or whatever you want to call it, right? Without being an architect or being labeled as an architect. And we'll go into it a bit more when we discuss how do you become a Salesforce architect. But that for me is really the natural transition into becoming an architect, is slowly taking up these responsibilities, these smaller tasks.
Yeah, I think from my experience, from what I've seen, it feels like one of the main differences between, perhaps being an admin and being an architect is a much greater appreciation of the way everything links together and the importance of your architectural design and how the pieces slot together in terms of integrations and other tools. So for me, I've always felt like that is quite a differentiator when you start looking at being an architect and looking after these larger sorts of orgs, which have a lot more complex integrations. For me, it feels very important that those types of companies should be getting support or having an architect work for them. Would you agree that that's correct?
Yeah, I would say, yeah. I mean, you're spot on. That also summarizes. I think it's very hard to put a label today that who is an architect, and also especially in those bigger orgs, there are so many moving parts. Like once you have more than 1,000 users, there can be people who have a lot of experience, and they can be, like doing architectural work. Like it's not the title, it's the work that you do that matters. So yeah, you're spot on.
Thanks, Ankit. Well, let's stick with the slide that's on the screen at the moment. And we've heard a little bit about, what is an architect? What is the role of an architect? Is it understood? But I think it would be great to hear from the both of you as existing architects. So why don't we kick off with Lilith? And could you tell us a little bit about your journey to becoming a Salesforce architect? How did you get here?
Yes, I think I touched upon it already a bit. And my personal belief is that you could grow in becoming an architect. It's not as if all of a sudden you get this or that cert, or you get hired with this or that title, and that bam, you're now an architect. I think really everything that you do leading up to this point will empower you to already take on those responsibilities and start molding that particular mindset that you need. So for my personal experience, that's exactly how I started. I started taking up additional responsibilities here and there. I was quite proactive, and doing some of the certifications for me was more of an empowerment and knowing the background, for example, of the data architecture, of the sharing and visibility, integration, the identity, all those parts empowered me to really speak up on domains that maybe otherwise I wouldn't have felt so strong or, in place to actually make any comments on. So that was for me why those certifications really helped me. But again, it's a very personal trajectory. And whether or not you go the certification routes, becoming an architect without any hands-on experience throughout, whether it is those smaller tasks that you do, or really full-blown projects where you are an architect, it's going to be very, very tough, I think, to become an architect without having the hands-on.
Yeah, absolutely. How long do you think it took you to become a certified as a CTA? How many are we talking? Years? How much time did that take?
So for the CTA itself, I think I went quite fast because I'm a true nerd at heart. So I just love to study and I love pushing myself. So I did the prerequisites in about a year or two, something like that. And then the last leg of the pyramid, so the top one that looks the smallest but really isn't. That one took me, I think, also about a year and a half.
Yeah, and it sounds like a very, very intense process. I do know someone in our community who took the CTA and passed, but she said she gave up at least 6 months of her life in that final stage of preparing for the board, and then decided just to take a significant amount of time off afterwards to go out and have a life again.
For sure. I think that's the thing that, people tend to underestimate when they see those timelines. Maybe someone took 6 months or took a year and a half. Also, again, depending a lot on the background that they had already. That was my life, right? CTA, I lived, breathed. That was all I did. I had no social life, which during COVID was easier to maintain than now, I guess. But that was all I did, and my husband also knew that, between those times there's not much time that I will have for him, because this is what I was going to do. I woke up, started studying, did some mocks, took a bit of a break during lunch maybe, and then I started again. That was pretty much my days, and I also took quite a bit of personal leave to study, so it was very tough, and it's a very big commitment, not only towards yourself but towards your family and friends. They have to understand what you're going through.
And where did your job fit into it in terms of the experience gained? Did you find that you were working on projects that supported your journey to CTA? Did you go out and sort of seek projects that would contribute towards that hands-on knowledge?
So I was very, very lucky. Not only was I working for a customer, so on a project with a customer, and they completely understood why I wanted to go for this, and that this was my passion and I was going to invest a lot of time. They also saw me maturing quite a bit throughout the journey, because you do grow a lot. You have to put yourself out there constantly to get the feedback, so that you know where your pain points are, which is a very painful process at first, because feedback is nice, but it also somewhat undermines your self-confidence sometimes. So, it made me grow a lot. So they did see the value of this. So I did this on top of the project. And on that project, I was very lucky again to be in a room or in a situation where I could really explore different avenues, different angles, take a bit of leadership here, risk management, talking integrations, looking into some identity, maybe not doing everything hands-on, but I could always lean back on a very experienced team to really dive into any conversations and any topics that I needed a bit more help on. So yeah, I couldn't have wished for a better client at the time.
That's fantastic. And I know this is something that Ankit will probably mention as well. But sort of community support from other architects, did you have a more of community support at all? I know that Ankit definitely has, but people that you could talk to outside of work, a support group or a study group or other architects that you could reach out to, and did you find that you needed to?
For sure. And I think this is the only way to pass the CTAs. If you have this group of people that you can talk to, that you can reflect on complex, problems on, and also just sometimes rant about, like, oh, I'm spending so much time and still I'm making the same mistakes. So I think both Ankit and I have a very good friend in this, being Johan Furman, who is like the best person to have in your corner. He will be frank. He will tell you you're not doing this and that right, but it will always be from such a kind place that you can't help but feel grateful for all the feedback that and the time that he gives you. So definitely having those people in your corner, that will make all the difference. And that's for me, again, a difference between normal certification path and CTA. I always took the other certifications quite lone wolf style. You cannot do that for the CTA.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. So Ankit, let's come over to you, because you've got a slightly different path into your career, and would love to hear a little bit more about how you became a Salesforce architect, especially considering you're a freelancer.
Sure. So as I mentioned, I am an accidental architect. I didn't choose to be on this path, although as Lilith mentioned, again, Johan was telling to me for quite some time that, hey, you should pursue this. You work as an architect. And as she said, he's a really nice person. He's right now on vacation, so I'm pretty sure he's not listening to this. But yeah, he was pushing me and I was like, sure. And I was not going on that architect path because that was like the CTA path. And as Lilith mentions, for all valid reasons, like you need to give up 6 months to a year or more of your life. And I don't see that. I don't see the need in my life to make that investment right now. Work is good, life is good. So I don't need to make that. To each his own. So I became an accidental architect by I was working on a project. Then like networking, freelance world, networking is important. So I called from a buddy of mine, and that in this project, this was a big implementation for an SMB. The architect on this job had to leave for some family issues, for family reasons. His mom was sick, and my buddy just called and he was like, "Hey, we need someone, and the job is good, and can you please come in?" And I was like, "Well, I'm not an architect." And he was like, "Just give the interview." So I gave the interview and I cleared it, and they were like, "Yeah, we want you to join as an architect." And I was like, "Okay." And the client was actually, I can say this, it was the Salesforce Customer Success Group. So I was interested in working with Salesforce more closely and seeing how they work. And that's how I became an architect. But uh, as Lilith said, I had already done all the steps before to be at that spot. You have to be at the place at the right time, but you also need to put in the work. So when this happened, which is last year, I already had like 9 years of Salesforce experience, and I started as a developer in 2012, and then I became a consultant, and then I became a freelancer. And how I used to sell myself is I'm more like a Swiss Army knife, which is also what an architect is, which is basically, you give me a problem and I'll solve it with the best tool possible. And yeah, that's how. So then I got this project. I started working on this project, and I was like, okay, I am in this project. I should better get certified, because then it just feels better, because I'm working as an architect, but I didn't have any of those. I was just PD1 certified, and I don't have anything against certification. It's just that I didn't find the time. I have hobbies. So 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 I then decided, and I think it took me a month or maybe 5 months. So when I was doing those certifications, especially the application architect side of things, they went quite fast, because I was like, oh yeah, I know this, I've done this before. Oh yeah, I know this, I've done this before. And when I did them, I was like, I could have done them even before. I was just lazy. But again, to each his own. And I didn't have the need to do, but once I got the job, I did it. So how I became an architect is just by putting in the work beforehand, and then being at the right place at the right time, and just networking.
So for you, Ankit, do you think are there any architect certifications left for you to do, or would the next step be to go all out for CTA? Is that something you'd want to do? Because it's not, not everybody wants to become a CTA.
Yeah, so I'm definitely not looking forward to become a CTA this year, although I have set a personal goal of being system architect by the end of this year. And I'm lacking 2 certifications, the integration and the deployment manager, which I think I'll easily knock it out by the end of this year. So yeah, so I will do, like, I may do CTA in next year or something, but I don't have it on my vision right now, to be honest. But I do want to finish the system architect side of things, and then I more want to concentrate on B2B and B2C commerce and all of those. So as a freelancer, I'm also looking at return on investment and business side, and I'm trying to expand more of my skills and offerings, if you want to call it. So yeah, so I'm not looking forward to go on the CTA, no.
So I think that's a really important point that you make, though, is it's not just a tick box exercise, is it? And there's not just the architecture certifications, and it can be just as valuable to go and get other certifications that can support what you're doing, and as you say, become more well-rounded, and not do them so that you can just focus on the architect ones.
Right.
So we're going to do questions at the end, but I've seen some interesting questions coming in, and I think there's one for each of you that I think we should tackle now. So sure. Ankit, we've had a question come in to say, which is the harder job? Is it a Salesforce developer or a Salesforce architect or a Salesforce admin? And I feel that you can probably speak to that, having been a developer or Salesforce developer since 2012, I think you said, and now working on the architecture side.
I would say it's definitely the architect. And I can also give you the reason. So when you are working as a developer, you're basically getting your task and you need to do your task. And then you usually have someone to look up to. The real depth of when I understood what an architect is. So I got this project, and without saying much about it. So we had to work on a solution because the client was losing 6 million a year, 6 million euros a year they were losing, and we had to build a solution in order to identify it and then get it back. And that's the moment where I realized, okay, I mean, I'm not using explicitives, but then I was like, okay, this is serious. That's a lot of money that is riding on the decisions that you have to take. So again, I would not say any of the job is hard to me. It's just different challenges. And I like challenges as a developer, like problem solving, but architect is more answering. It's more responsibility. You have more responsibility from that point of view. And yeah.
I think it's interesting because what I'm picking up is that I feel like both of you have a real growth mindset and enjoy that sort of professional development, which I think probably lends itself very well to becoming an architect and working up that pyramid. But to come back to Lilith, because I feel like this relates to your personal journey of becoming a CTA, there was a question here to say, Lilith, if you could go back, would you have taken the same approach to become a CTA? And they referenced the long study days and nights. I suppose
nice question.
Yeah, a great question. And I think what it made me think was, is there an alternative? It sounds like it's just an in-depth process, but yeah, would you go back and do anything differently?
So I would definitely do some things differently, but not that part. So what I would have done differently was the run up to it. So when I went for the pyramid, I was really looking at it like, this is the long part, and here I have to go through and get all of them. And of course, I always thoroughly study. But I think if I would have taken a bit more time for each of the prerequisites, then I would have had to have less catch-up time when I started the last leg. So that would have been the part that I'd have done differently. But those long study days and nights for me would have been exactly the same because I'm really not that great at marathons. No condition at all. So give me a sprint any day of the week and I'll do that. So I think that just works better for me to have a clear goal, really go for it. And also I would always be afraid to kind of lose some of the knowledge, let's say, if I don't exercise it thoroughly, on a regular basis.
Yeah, I find that even with, any sort of certification, that you can study for such a long time and put things off for a long time and then find that you've not lost some of that knowledge, but it's just not as fresh in your memory. So while we're talking about becoming an architect, and we know there are lots of different types of architects, how do you see the future of architects? And I'll pass this over to you first, Lilith. Where do you think the future is going for architects?
Yeah, I think let's start with how it has evolved so far. And I think there we've seen a lot more recognition being given to architects from Salesforce point of view. They have launched a great architect team where, we have the site with well architected and all these kind of awesome resources that kind of are exactly what you need as an architect to sometimes convince the customer that, yes, this really is the best way to approach it. Look, I have the backup here. Salesforce thinks so too. And also having a broader set of architect certifications, emphasizing, for example, on the solution and on the commerce, as Ankit was mentioning, showing a broad group of people who are architects, not just CTA as the one and only. So I think that's already showing it a bit more. Where I see it going even further in the future is, in my experience, all the different projects are really becoming a lot more complex. So you are very seldomly at this point, going for a vanilla Salesforce greenfield with a sales cloud, and that's just the only system. It's going to be multi-cloud. It's going to be a lot of different systems. So you have to really think on a larger scale. So I think in that sense, a lot of in-house positions for architects will likely start opening up. We'll have a lot more customers realizing also the value of having architects on board and how this protects, again, their long-term investment, as Ankit was mentioning. And that's where I see architects going. So I don't think we've seen the height of the architect craze just yet.
And Ankit, how about you? Where do you see the future of architects going?
I think it's mostly multi-cloud, as I mentioned. So my current client, for example, has definitely the Sales Cloud and Service Cloud, but they also have Marketing Cloud, they also have Experience Cloud, they also have Commerce Cloud. And that's why I'm like, I want to get those certifications, and rather than not like go to the top of the CTA. I think also the CTA will also change with time. I also see that. And I think, as Lilith mentioned, it's not just customer 360. I'm saying it's 360 plus a bunch of other stuff. So it would be very beneficial if you know some AWS, like you don't have to know it deeply, or Azure or Firebase, like Google, like, other technologies, what work with, like, and serviceless computing and all of this stuff. So the future is definitely multi-cloud for sure, but also know at least one or the other technology. I'll be honest, I love Salesforce. I have everything what is around me thanks to Salesforce, but there are some times where I have to propose a solution outside of Salesforce, and I'm okay with that, like it's not like it has to be just Salesforce, and especially like saving PDFs. So that's like one of the pain points. So yeah, I think the future is multi-cloud, and to each his own. Just carve your path like you want, and also just don't follow the herd, and choose what you like. So if you like Commerce Cloud and Experience Cloud, then go for it. There's nothing wrong in that.
Thanks, Ankit. So before we move on to the next section, an interesting question from one of our viewers. Let me just bring it up. It was posed to Ankit. And do you see a future within the developer area of the ecosystem to be diminishing? And will there be more opportunities for architects as opposed to developers? I thought this was quite an interesting question to bring up here while we talk about the future of architects.
Sure. Yeah, I agree to that. And it's not just because of the architects. I think Salesforce in itself, I don't remember where I said it already, but Salesforce in itself is also blurring the lines between an admin and a developer and a consultant. So previously you could just be like an admin certified where you would do some tasks, but now it's an admin developer, if you want to call it. It's also on my course at Salesforce Ben, where I talked about this. So previously as an admin, you were supposed to just go and create workflow rules and create fields and everything. But now you're supposed to have that customer interaction. Like just an admin certificate won't cut you or get you the job. And again, Salesforce or the more IT industry is moving towards point and click tools. So, the lines are blurring, and maybe in 5 years, it'll be like one person. I mean, there is some people who can write code, and you will always need some code, like writing LWCs or some Apex or batch jobs and all of that stuff. But the roles, you cannot just be a developer. You can be a developer if you don't want to grow. Like I have some friends who are very happy in their job. There they are, and they don't want to get into all of this. They just want to write code, and that's good for them. But if you want to grow, and also again, money plays a part with life. You grow up, you start a family and stuff, and you want more. So I would say that if architects versus devs is pretty hard for me to say, but I'm definitely thinking like architect, admin, consultant, this will kind of become into one. And yeah, that's what I think.
Thank you, Ankit. Well, why don't we jump into the next section of our chat, which is around the considerations of becoming an architect and some potential solutions. And Julia referenced earlier the hiring survey that's done by Mason Frank, where they asked a number of questions about the role of an architect and what's expected. And some of the comments that came back was about the need to develop technical knowledge, project management skills, having experience as a consultant, learning integration, needing to take on a lot more responsibilities within projects. And that can be easier said than done. That is an awful lot to juggle. So we have had some talks as a group about some of the considerations when thinking about becoming an architect, maybe some of those potential obstacles and how you might overcome them. So the first one that we wanted to touch on, Lilith, was sort of the time and capacity. And I think, you've spoken a little bit to this already about the amount of effort and time that it took for you to do CTA, and not just CTA, but doing the other certifications in the lead up to it. And do you have any advice, practical advice for people who might be wondering how they can manage to do all the extra work needed?
Yeah, and I think there you touch on a great point. So what I see with regard to time and capacity and some of the things that you need to consider if you want to become an architect is indeed, the certification path. Although I think Ankit and a few people in the audience already clearly highlighted that you don't necessarily need to have the certification to be doing the work. Although in my personal path, it definitely helped focus a bit more of my attention to areas which I might have not considered before. But I think what is really also relevant there is if you want to take the path that I took, for example, where you start taking a bit more of those responsibilities as you go, you need to have room and capacity to do that, because it might come on top of your regular work, because maybe your company isn't too happy to just say, okay, you've never done this before, but we'll take a chance on you. Chances are not that high that they will be that eager to do that. So likely you'll take up a bit more, maybe do a bit longer days. So for me, these are definitely things to consider. And then on top of that, if you do want to go for the certs, all that study time takes a lot of effort too. So I think there, again, where is the impact going to be is where I would think on the concessions that you need to make is where will the impact be? It will likely be, again, your social calendar, your friends and family. So if they understand that this is a path that you want to really go for and something you have to work very hard towards now, whether it is CTA or architect career, that is the most important thing I think you can take as a step to make sure that you get the green light to go for it.
I do think it can be hard, especially in terms of capacity, and we all have different responsibilities in our personal lives and in our professional lives. So for me personally, I definitely have found it hard to have the energy and have the focus to continue my studies outside of work. I think most Salesforce professionals are very passionate individuals. They tend to love Salesforce and love their jobs and give it their all. And that doesn't always leave a lot of energy for continuing that passion in your evenings and weekends and dedicating that time to study. I think it can be quite helpful to set yourself targets. I would imagine that that's possibly what you had to do, Lilith, was set kind of dates and get things booked in to give yourself something to work towards.
Yeah, for sure. I think there again, if you really feel like, okay, I am in a growth trajectory and I really want to go for this, I want to take multiple certifications this year or whatever, I would always say, okay, but look at the company that you're working for. How is the atmosphere there? Because they have to understand that this is something that within the Salesforce ecosystem is just a given. Everyone wants to learn, and even if you have a certification, it doesn't, it's not forever. You have to have those maintenance exams as well, so you need to keep on top of things to really be a valuable asset in a project team. So that's where I always advise, just look at your company. Do they have that learning mindset? If not, then can you talk them into having that learning mindset? I've done that in the past, mixed results, but definitely something worthwhile. And if not, consider, is that a match? Because in the end, it has to be some give and take. Every company knows that if their people are motivated to go for these things and keep learning, it's going to drive their value too, because they have more motivated people there who are eager to take maybe those not popular tasks, which are a bit more complex. So yeah, I think that's one of the most important things that I would really emphasize is really take a close look.
Thank you, Lilith. And Ankit, I know that you've mentioned as well about, perhaps you didn't do those certifications before, and, you have a very active social life and hobbies. How did you find setting aside the time to do that kind of last minute preparation, do some of that cert revision before taking them?
As I said, I became an architect, and then it was so I got the job, and it's not like I needed it, but I was like, okay, I feel better, and to have that if I'm getting paid, then I all better get those. And I also wanted to test myself. So to be honest, and this might sound like I just needed 5 days for each cert. And again, I have 10 years of experience. I worked on many things. So when you say about considerations, one of the things that I also did as a freelancer, and the market was pretty easier. The market was, I would say, it was an easier freelance market before, where I was always choosing project to expand my knowledge. So if somebody offered me a project about something where I have not worked before, then I would even charge a lower rate, because I'm also gaining knowledge. So it was not just money that I was gaining, I was also gaining knowledge. And I already did a lot of, if you would look at the list of my projects, I mean, 50-60% of it is Service Cloud, but the rest is very varied. And I've worked with startups with 5 users to enterprise clients with, like eBay, 10,000 licenses. So it's very varied. And that's why I didn't take that long. And same thing, I could pace myself and go for system, like I need to do two system architect, like integration and deployment I need to do, and then B2B and B2C, which is the goal until the end of the year. But I'm like, if I get 2 out of these 4, I'm happy. So you have to pace it right. You have to pace it. And those are that's how I'm planning into. And I've done tons of integration, so I know that I will not need a lot of time. But again, as Lilith said, now I recently moved into a new apartment. I'm going on vacation in September. So I'm like, okay, October, November, when it's getting dark, everybody's home, I'll just knock these 2 out before the Christmas markets come along. And then I want to go out and drink blue wine.
That's a goal for everyone. I wanted to come back to something that you said earlier, which I think really touches on this concept of imposter syndrome, because I thought it was very interesting where you talk about being an accidental architect and perhaps not realizing how much of the experience you already had. And therefore, in your situation, perhaps you needed less study time, revision time, because you were already doing it. You already had a lot of this experience. And I think that really resonates with me as someone who, I'm not a developer, I don't write code, I don't have an IT degree. And so there is almost a constant feeling of imposter syndrome. And do I know as much as I think I do? Or maybe I don't know enough. If I'm an accidental admin, how could I possibly become an architect? And I know that you've mentioned that, you felt a little bit of an imposter syndrome as well. How did you tackle that?
I still do. I mean, in other words, architect is also a very lonely place. So you're on the top of the pyramid, but then you're just there and you don't have anybody to do. So I still feel like an imposter many a times, at least once a week. But as Lilith mentioned, it's just about, having those friends or your circle of trust and people around you whom you can, just count on. So again, taking some names, like it's Johan for sure, then Daniel Stange, like he's my constant sparring buddy. And if I have any questions regarding, some architectural questions, I will go to him and I just ask him. And he was also, and it's also important to have good friends around you. So when I became an architect, I didn't know what should I charge. So I went to him and I was like, so what does an architect get paid like? And he was like, this and this. And I was like, really? And he was like, just go for it. Don't undersell yourself. You're worth every penny. Just don't worry about it. Just say it. And my palms were sweating when I was negotiating, but I just did it and then I got it. And I was like, thanks. So you need to have those people around you who give you that constant feedback, because again, I work for a client, so it's like a thankless job. I do a very good implementation. You're like, so what? You're being paid for that. So yeah, I do feel like that, but it's just having friends around, and it's a struggle that you need to keep building on.
Thank you, Ankit. And the audience strongly disagrees. You're a rock star, not an imposter.
Yeah, I know, Brian.
Lilith, do you think there are any considerations or constraints around sort of geographical reasons? So location, the need to travel. What is your experience of that as an architect?
Yeah, so of course, we've just had this big bout of COVID and it's not fully over yet. So still travel is a bit more restricted, but still, I see two major elements where geographical constraints do apply, especially in the architect, role. As Ankit mentioned, you're really on top there. You have to really communicate with everyone. And I think it was already mentioned in the comments too, the importance of soft skills. So a lot of the job of an architect, unfortunately, is a lot of calls and a lot of, checking, making sure that whatever comes from the business side is communicated and translated into something that is understandable and executable from the technical side. So this means really to be either there on site, for example, for workshops, which is already a geographic complexity, especially if you're working offshore. But also, if you look at some time zone restrictions can make it difficult, even if you're offsite, even if it's a remote session that you need to follow. I've seen quite a few of my colleagues who actually work offshore. They're sitting in India and then they have to adhere to European or even US time zones. And I'm just like, wow, you guys, that's crazy. That's just very tough to do because you have to be on point. You have to be kind of sharp and make sure that you're there mentally as well, following everything that's going on, able to communicate it well. And I know I'm not 100% now because I'm a bit sick, and this is already quite tough, and it's only 1 hour session, let alone, conducting kind of a workshop in such a context where you're so off your biorhythm. So yeah, I know it might sound silly, but seriously, these are considerations that you have to make that, it's not always that easy because as an architect, regardless of the time zone, you have to be there and you have to communicate.
Thank you, Lilith. And we appreciate you being here while you're poorly today. So,
I would also just add one quick thing. If you want to be an architect, whoever wants to be an architect, you should like meetings. If you don't like meetings, then this is not the job for you. So my days at least spend 3-4 hours just writing just meetings and taking notes. So those are the two skills you definitely need to work on, and they are not part of CTA.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really, really good point, because it's not just the meeting, is it? It's preparing for a meeting, following up on everything after a meeting.
And remembering stuff.
Yeah, and remembering everything. So I want to leave enough time because we definitely have some good questions in the chat. So for our final point, I just want to ask you about becoming an architect without working for a large consultancy, because that is something that we hear quite frequently, that in order to become an architect, especially to become a CTA, that you need to work for a large consultancy to get that sort of experience that's needed. So interested to hear from both of you on that. Perhaps over to Lilith first.
Yeah, for me, those are kind of different concepts. So definitely, I think you can become an architect without working for a partner, right? So yes, you may have to keep in mind that the companies and projects that you're working on may be different. So if you're working, for example, in-house at a customer, then maybe you're very used to their industry, their way of working, and that is kind of your frame of reference. So you have to keep in mind that there is a whole other world out there. Other industries may have different standards of working. And I think what is the strength there, if you want to still, have that broader knowledge while being at a customer, is community, right? You can go to community meetups and you get all these other fresh perspectives, ask some questions there, and that will definitely help you grow into that sense too. And as I mentioned, I see a really big future for architects at in-house, positions at customer site as well. When it comes to the CTA part, yes, again, you can do it without being a partner. I think Johan proved that quite well, and he's definitely not the only one. But you do have to keep in mind the same complexities that I mentioned. Your frame of reference might not always be as broad. And one of the things that is definitely valuable for the CTA is knowing how to work with different industries and understand business processes very, very quickly. So as an architect, usually you have a bit of time to kind of acquaint yourself with the customer, their context, maybe do a bit of research. You don't have that in the CTA. So there, as much background as you can have on different industries and different situations that you've been in the past, or different issues, conflicts, or whatever situations that were tough in the past. That baggage is so useful to keep you on your toes and make sure that you can think really quickly on your feet for the CTA. So yes, in both situations, but maybe a bit more effort.
Thank you, Lilith. And Ankit, what about you? What do you think about becoming an architect without working for a partner or for a large consultancy in that way?
Right. I concur with what Lilith said. So I have not worked at any, well, I have worked with consulting companies as clients, but I've worked on varied, many different projects. And I think that is that is what is important, to have that breadth of knowledge. And as Lilith proved, as Lilith said about Johan, that he didn't work at a partner and still became one, but he also, so you need to be a self-motivated person. He also drawed out tons of scenarios, and you fire up a free developer org and create a scenario. You are Ferrari, you are selling cars, and then how is Ferrari creating their whole thing? And then you are Formula One, and then Formula One, sorry, I'm a Formula One and Ferrari fan, and then you're Formula One and you're organizing races all across the world, and then you have these people and marketing and everything, all these vendors. So think about those scenarios, think about different industries. So Ferrari being an automobile industry, then Formula One being event industry, sports. So these are different. So you need to come up with different scenarios, and you need to being a partner helps, because if your partner is working with different clients in different industries and you are lucky to be on every project, then you might get that exposure, but it's very rare. So I think it's more about initiative and trying to get a broader experience, and you need to maintain the balance between the breadth and the depth, because you also need the depth to know the things. It will not help if you know all the clouds but you don't know how to implement them.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Ankit. Well, I'm going to bring Julia back on for just a moment before we hop into Q&A. We've got a QR code up here on the screen for you. And Julia's just joining us again.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Christine. You led that conversation so well. And Kit and Lilith, I've learned so much, really. And yes, before we go into Q&A, Mason Frank Mason Frank is conducting a survey to do exactly this, to determine exactly where architects are, and what the career's like, what the hiring's like. They haven't released the report yet. I think it's set to be released later in the year. So if you would like to scan this QR code, anybody watching, you will receive an email with the report once it's released. But thank you so much, everybody. Christine has been asking quite a few questions that have been coming up from the commenters. So thank you, everybody who participated. And you all brought up a lot of good points, in different parts, but pretty much surround yourself with the correct people and with the correct crowd. Like Lilith said, being in a company that's willing to listen and willing to help you grow and help you learn, that's very important. Somebody did ask. Yes,
we've got some really great questions in the chat still, so I'm quite looking forward to diving into some of those.
Yeah, if you want to take it away.
Wow. So one that I thought was very interesting that came in just now is this one. Let's bring it up. So one of the questions was, as an architect, is it expected that you code as part of your job responsibilities? And I feel like this is probably a really frequently asked question. So Ankit or Lilith, what do you think?
So I, as a developer, think no, although I do code at some time, but you're not expected to code, but you should be able to know how code works. So when you are an architect, let's say you have a team. So I have a team and we are like 4 analysts, 2 developers. And when I am thinking of a solution, then I can break it down and tell my developers to write code and tell the analyst to do the declarative part and then bring it all together. So you're not expected to know code. You're not expected to code, but you should at least know how it works, and that's why you have the PD1 certification over there.
Yeah, maybe if I can jump in, I think what you're referring to already covers quite a bit of it. And maybe an additional element is a lot of the things that we want to do as an architect is make sure that whatever we are creating again, is scalable, but also is modular. So if you're creating something custom, you might want to think about how does it logically make sense to break it down so that it can be reusable parts later on. And I think that is easier if you have a bit more of that developer background. Again, you don't have to be able to code, but if you know how coding, how Lightning Web Components can work together, how you can nest them, how they can communicate, it makes it so much easier to break those complex things down into something that will really work very well on the long term and be more reusable.
Thank you both. So we had another comment here that I thought comes back to something that we brought up earlier in terms of geographical and architects needing to be available in particular time zones, regardless of where they are based in the world. So one of our comments here was, perhaps there's additional effort because English fluency is very important to work as an architect. And I wondered what your thoughts were on that.
I'm living. Okay, you go ahead.
Yes, sorry, Ankit.
No, go ahead.
No, so I agree with this comment. I think this is very, very true. I think there are a few regions where it might be a bit different. So I've seen that in France, for example, French is a bit more, useful. And I think in some situations you might have to have a few languages that you support. However, in the end, especially if you're working with bigger teams, English fluency will definitely help, because even if your business users may be, I don't know, Spanish or French speaking or Japanese, none of my languages, but, broader set out there, you likely will be using English as the language within the development team anyway, to make sure that you can use cross origin teams as well. So yeah, I would agree with this comment.
Ankit, sorry, I put the question down, but carry on. You did have something to say.
Yeah, I'm not. I would say it depends on the location. So I'm an Indian and I live in Germany. I live here for 10 plus years. And for my current client, they are through and through German. So German is a very important language. And if I don't speak English, it doesn't matter. Coincidentally, everybody in the team speaks English and everybody in the team speaks German. And now I can say I can speak some level of German. So again, of course, as Lilith said, fluency, if you would have a multicultural team or you want to be a part of community, English is like, English is like the base language in which we communicate. But again, you can be lucky. I don't know how the market is, but at least in Germany, I know there are some companies, especially the SMB sector, where like if you know German, they're good with that. So even if you speak English, that doesn't count. If you can speak German, that's what counts. So yeah.
No, that's great. Thank you for that. So here's another good question for you, perhaps for you, Ankit. Does a good developer mean a good architect in future?
Whoa. Yes and no. Okay, yes and no. So from the analytical point of view, yes, if you can think in if you can think in modular code, as Lilith said, if you write clean code, and I hope you do, and if you can think that modularity and you're a good programmer, the chances of you being a good architect is good, because it's just different systems, right? Like in code, you have these small parts and then you bring it together, and that's what architect is. However, I have many, many good developer friends, and they are introverts. And that is a no-go for an architect, because as an architect, as you mentioned before, you are the glue, you are the pipe between stakeholders and the developers. So you need to be a good communicator. And it's it's like a IT industry thing that good developers are introverts, which is true. So being a good developer is very, very helpful for this. But again, you need to work on your communication skills, presentation skills, very important presentation skills, note-taking skills, and also like communicating with the team, and also empathy. That's very important.
So I think that, sorry, Lilith. Sorry.
Yeah, I just want to add one more thing, because I think, to be honest, Ankit, you almost covered everything, but there is one thing that I see sometimes with developers growing to architects that holds them back, is that every challenge or every requirement becomes must to have a technical solution for that. And not every problem needs a technical solution, which is something that Vinay Sail, who is an amazing CTA, really, kind of pushed when I was going for the CTA, like keep this in mind. And I think that is when you give some challenges to a developer, it's just so exciting. I know for myself to just, I'm sure I can figure this one out. You're just trying to solve that puzzle. But as an architect, sometimes you have to hold back and say, okay, but this doesn't make sense because how often are you going to use it? Is it really worth the investment of doing this? How many users are we talking? So you're becoming a lot more pragmatic in that thing. And I think that's something that developers need to shift sometimes a bit in the mindset, because it's a very exciting challenge, but it doesn't mean that it should be a technical solution.
Fair point.
Thank you, Lilith and Ankit. And I just wanted to bring this one up onto the screen. Sadly, we are running out of time, but someone really liked the content and wanted to know how to access it later. So in great news, it's been recorded and it will be available on both LinkedIn and on the Salesforce Ben YouTube channel. But it looks like time is sadly pretty much up. So let me hand back to Julia to wrap up for us.
Thank you, everybody, once again. I love this session. I think it was great. Like Christine said, it's going to be available for later viewership for anybody who's interested. Don't forget to sign up to receive the Mason Frank guide that's going to be released later this year. And thank you, everybody, for being here. Ankit, Lilith, Christine, this was very interesting. So thank you so much.
Thank you for organizing, and thank you, Christine, for facilitating. It was good.
My pleasure.
Yeah, it was really
Thank
nice.
you both.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.